wheel ace X here, and then you're just going to be jamming a lot of pairs. But the bottom line is, from this position, we're going to be doing a lot of calling in the spot. And I think that if we jam with King Jack here, we're never getting called by a hand like King 10 suited, Queen Jack suited, stuff like that. So when we're called, we're just like hoping to be flipping pretty much versus a hand like pocket nines, pocket eights. I think the majority of the time we're probably going to be dominated when we get called. And this hand also plays very well post flop. So for example, like if we flop a king or a jack, those are usually very good cards for the EP opener's range. So when we flop strong with our king or jack, our opponent's likely to be very aggressive on those cards. So, you know, we have a pretty strong hand to be calling down when we perceive our opponents to maybe be pretty aggressive here. So, yeah, bottom line, I'm just calling here unless, you know, our opponent's just wildly insane from this session. Yep. From this position.
Yeah, I agree with that. How about, let's say, with King Jack suited, you're still probably calling here, I would imagine, almost every time still King Jack suited? Doesn't really change in this specific moment?
No, I think actually more so than anything, I think we're probably more high frequency call with our suited hands just because those play a little bit better post flop, and I would rather be turning, like if I think, for example, like if I think ace jack is close, I would definitely be jamming ace jack off over ace jack suited because for like just playability wise, the suited variety is going to be pretty good, and we kind of benefit a little bit from getting folds by ace jack offsuit, I think. But like I said, even ace jack off from the spot I think is like really close, and would probably mostly even be calling there. But yeah, bottom line is we're doing a lot of calling in this spot, so right. Very little jamming, and I think this hand's definitely like a little too loose to be ripping here.
Right, agreement with that. I think we can move on from that unless anyone has anything else.
And I guess just to add on top of that real quickly, we do have very affordable, I mean, we don't offer them, but there are pretty affordable pre-flop charts out there. So if you guys are kind of struggling with that, I think just starting off with a solid pre-flop game plan, I think is going to help you guys out tremendously, where there's so many people that are really off and kind of don't know what they should be doing with certain hands in certain spots. So if you guys can get your hands on some pre-flop charts, I think that would be a really good start, especially if you're looking to improve. So yeah,
for sure, agree. Just posting BBZ ones. All right, we got pocket aces here in the small blind.
Yeah, so that's a move. So a hand like King 10 suited is kind of like a mergey bluff, I would say, pretty much, because you probably get hands like King Jack and King Queen to fold. So there's a little bit of value behind jamming a hand like King 10 suited there. Now, I wouldn't just like blindly do that. Again, that would depend on how aggressive our opponent is being, but it just wants to throw in, because we are so tight, it wants to throw in some quote unquote bluffs. And like, I think you see the ace 4 suited and the King 10 suited are basically hands that they're you know, bluffing with, because obviously like if we're only jamming like really good hands, we need to throw a few bluffs in there. But
I like jamming more. Like in my head before I even saw that, I was like, I like jamming more King 10 suited in that spot than King Jack offsuit. If the guy is going to be opening pretty wide, I think I still probably would be flatting most of the time, but I could definitely see more argument for jamming King 10 suited than King Jack offsuit in that specific moment.
Yeah, if the hand can get more better hands to fold, then I think it becomes a better shove, really, because like I said, I think with King 10 suited we get hands like King Jack, King Queen to fold a lot. And then when we get called, more like a lot of times we're flipping versus like 9s, 8s, 7s. We're pretty live versus a hand like Ace Queen, so stuff like that. So it's just to throw in an extra bluff, you know. Yeah. So we got a limp here.
Limp here with aces in the small blind.
So yeah, what are you guys doing in the spot? And if you have access to the BBZ charts, no cheating. Let's just give our honest opinions, and then when we want to go back to it, we can kind of look at what we want to do.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
You want to? We're all here to learn anyway. You know, you want to. There's no.
Right.
No,
we want to give our solid.
Matter. I mean, it matters a little bit, but it doesn't matter in terms of learning. You know, it doesn't. It's not like we're taking an exam and you got to cheat to get the right answer, so you get an A on it.
Right. Also, like if you actually just say what you want to do and then you go back to look at it, I think it gets you out of these like natural tendencies you may have. Like if you're off on one spot, then you can like look back at it and kind of learn some new information that you may not have seen before, rather than just like looking at it and you may not even be honest with yourself, you know, subconsciously. So I think it's good to say what you would do in the spot and then check it out. So there's no prize for who has the most right answers here. You know, we want to give our honest opinions here.
All right, well,
So Fountain Flood says limp here against guy as playing a high V prep and then exploitably 3x.
I like that. I raise here, but I raise small blind a lot. I feel like it's. I'll just try to give you my opinion since it doesn't seem like too many people are typing. I feel like it's one of those spots where you can kind of play a mixed strategy, but I imagine that like Odin or the solvers overall want you to be just calling here. But I think I usually call here, but I think like a mixed strategy is okay. Like Fountain Flood is saying, if the guy is playing a very high V pip, like there's certain guys who just aren't going to raise behind also. Like who aren't going to like raise light, like me and Kurt talk about all the time. People don't do it as much as they should maybe in the big blind. You also have pocket aces, so he's going to have a lot less of his strong hands in his range. So there's that argument of like raising to build the pot now because you're going to get it checked back a lot. But I probably do on that note still call most of the time here.
Okay. I actually think the exact opposite is happening here. And I think a big reason here is we mainly want to be raising with like our super strong hands here. Like essentially aces through tens, like maybe tens does some mixing, but for the most part, I'm basically pure opening with these hands. One, our opponent like still has to defend relatively wide, so it's good that we get to build a pot. Also with aces, we kind of like block some like really strong hands he's going to be getting in, like, you know, ace king through ace 10, like hands like that. So it's more likely our opponent's going to check behind. And as you were saying before, I think like almost no opponents are isolating from the big blind as wide as they should. So when we trap in this spot, it's not working out as well as it should be, depending on what our charts say, because most opponents are not isolating like the 9-4 offs, the 10-3 offs as much as they should be versus a small blind limp. So in theory, I actually think that trapping works a little bit worse here. Now, in general, I think you're raising mostly with the top of your like pair range here anyway, but as an exploit, you may want to be like some of these hands that might mix as a limp and a raise from the small blind. Like with your better hands, maybe you can just end up raising a little bit more high frequency because you're not going to be able to get that limp jam on if your opponent is not isolating enough from the big blind. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I do it, and I agree with your point a lot, especially that the guy won't be like when you have aces, the chance that he has a hand number one goes down a lot. And on top of that, we also like we talk about all the time, people don't isolate that spot enough. So kind of adding those two factors up means you're probably going to get checked back on like most of the time, you know, and not being able to build the pot while he's probably going to, like, he's going to flat you at 9-7 off though to an open, right? 8-7 off, let's say 8-6 off, even hands like that, right? He's going to flat you to an open a lot of the time. But if you're limping, he's just going to check all those. I mean, there's so many of those hands, like that's just like a few I named, you know, but there's just tons of those hands he's going to check back.
Yeah, so versus an open, big blind still has to defend. It looks like at least 62% of the range here. So you're also getting calls a lot from the big blind. I mean, you probably get a few more folds because, again, I don't think people defend as wide, which is another reason to maybe be opening a little bit wider from the small blind. But with our pairs here, for what it's worth, I have the chart up right now. It looks like we're basically pure opening tens plus here. And then, like, much more of the suited broadways are opening here, like for example, like the ace king suiteds through the ace 7 suiteds, the king jack suiteds, the king queen suiteds, and then like the ace queen offs to the ace 9 offs, like more so limping to potentially limp jam, because again, I think it's better that these hands get like immediate folds if we get to limp jam here. And then when we raise the suited varieties, when we get called the luck, these hands are going to play a lot better in position. So in general, with your strongest pairs, you're going to be raising a lot, and then with a lot of suited hands, you're going to be opening a lot here, and then you're going to be mixing to like pure limp jamming a lot of your offsuit ones because they play a little bit worse. So that's just what I'm seeing in the chart here anyway. So as a general note to yourselves, when you guys have like suited broadways here, be a little more frequent to open with those hands because they play better post flop when you get called at least a 62% frequency. And then if you want, start limp jamming a little bit more with the offsuit varieties. But again, going back to people not isolating enough, you can even open a little bit wider than your chart says, because I don't think, for one, anybody is jamming versus you're open wide enough, they aren't defending enough, and they're also not isolating enough. So
all right, we got the limp here. We're gonna have 3.25 isolate in the big blind. Quite an interesting flop.
So what do we think about the limp call? I actually really like the limp call here, because we're so shallow that it's likely like we're gonna be able to get stacks in and just play for stacks on most boards. Now this is like one of the worst ones that we could see. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually get some donk lead here, because this is gonna hit our limp calling range a lot better than big blind's like isolating range here. But I think standard players still to check.
Yeah, I had the thought that like this is a good board to start donk leading on with the aces here, but I don't know that I would be. I don't know how much in practice I'm actually doing it, but this does seem like a good board if you are going to do it to potentially do it on. But also like if okay, let's see what happens here.
Checking is also very fine as well. Yeah, I don't hate this. I would probably like size up to at least like third pot here because he's basically going to be floating close to any 2 cards here for the size, which I guess is fine when we have aces, but yeah, it's kind of whatever.
Yeah, I'd probably go at like personally go at least a third pot here if I was going to bet, but I don't really.
Yeah, to clarify, I'm almost certain that was a misclick because I remember after recording, I was like, I'm pretty sure I should have added more to the pot, but nothing I can do now, obviously.
Right. For sure, good to know.
All good.
Yeah, that'll definitely happen.
Like the donk, I think the donk lead is still good here too. I think when you limp here, I also think limp calling is best. So far so good.
This is interesting. Curious if you're
Actually, like,
calling here or shoving, Kurt. I feel like probably shoving.
I like
probably shoving, but I don't, just because like there's so many dicey turns. But you do have the ace of spades, which I like. I just feel like he's not gonna like fold like if he has actually a hand right now, he's just not gonna fold if you shove. Like if he has pocket eights, if he has pocket nines, pocket tens, or a 7x. Like I feel like if you just shove, he's probably not gonna fold here. But I'd like to get your opinion on your take on that.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that our opponent is gonna have like some raise folds here. I mean, as they should. If we just assume that our opponent like isn't capable of bluffing here, then I guess exploitably we can probably just play for stacks here. Since, like you said, there are like some bad runouts. This board is also good for us, so we can play a little bit aggressively here. He's gonna need to ISO like some 7x. He's gonna have some 8x, some 9x, whatever that he's gonna play a bit aggressively. Maybe he even has like a 6-4 that he can kind of like merge play here. But specifically with the ace of spades, I like calling a little bit more because your hand needs a little bit less showdown or a little less protection here, basically. And I don't necessarily think our opponent's going to go crazy on like an 8 or 9 or 4 or 3. In general, I think those cards should probably be better for us than they are for him. So even if they're action killers, quote unquote, it's kind of whatever. I mean, I think we still should mainly be slow playing with the ace of spades. But if I think that our opponent is just like not capable of bluffing here, then exploitably I would just stick it in. So I wouldn't hate one or the other. In theory, I think calling is best. But if we think our opponents are under bluffing and probably just stacking off in this spot, then jamming is probably best.
Yeah, like I definitely agree with what you're saying in theory, but like I also feel like at these stakes, some of these guys like literally have so little bluff. Like maybe they are like the 6-4, like the 8x, like some random 8x he could have, but like a lot of 8x's. I mean, he might have an 8x with a pair a lot of the times when he has it too. So yeah, I don't know. I agree with what you're saying, especially with the ace of spades. But also like I feel like exploitively it might just be like good to shove this a lot too, just because people like so rarely have bluffs in this spot. I feel like. But I definitely understand completely understand the argument for calling too. So
yeah, if it's under bluff, then for sure, like we don't really have to think about like what combos are best. But
I think hopefully we get to see what he has.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's stop here. Let's stop here for a
yeah,
second.
I don't like this donk lead on the turn here at all. I think that. For one, like donking here doesn't make much sense. Like the deuce doesn't really change the board so much where like it's so much better for our range than it is for his. So I would just let him kind of keep going here. Like he's already saying that he wants to put in some money, and by calling here, we're already kind of like slow playing. Now where I think we probably get donk leads are on specifically like an 8, a 9, a 4, a 3, like something that puts out a 4-card straight. Right. That is likely better for our range than it is for his. Also, like our opponent's telling us they're going to be pretty aggressive here, so it doesn't like if our plan is to trap, then it doesn't really make sense for us to be like betting here on the turn. So yeah, like I don't. Again, on the flop, I think it's fine to either check to call or jam, but on this turn, once we call, I think I'm just like pure checking here.
Yeah, this is probably like the driest turn you could have. So this is one of those turns you don't wanna. Either you don't really need to lead. There's just not really a reason to. Like like we were saying, like the opponent maybe has a king 8 or something, or like a 5-4 or something weird that he's just gonna like rip it on you here on the turn. So you want to like let that happen and not maybe give your opponent a reason to fold also. So either like
right. So in the rare times our opponent actually does have bluffs, we kind of force him to fold here. Right. So and we also this is a card where we're definitely going to stack off here anyway. So with how much money's already in the pot, I'm fine just checking and hoping that he's going to continue here, obviously. And then the other point I was going to make is your hand from your perspective. I would just say like, okay, this guy has like 0 bluffs here. Like maybe at worst you have a hand like ace-8 here that is like taking some kind of weird line here. But yeah, bottom line is I think we don't really get any leads on this card here.
Yeah. I would also keep in mind that like donk leads aren't like a huge part of the game. Like they're still part of it. There's still good spots to do it. But like I wouldn't like be overly doing like these like turn kind of leads. Like you don't want to like overdo it with the leads. Like I think if we look at the solvers, what they want you to lead, like let's say like 10% of turns, right, Kurt, or whatever it is. Like there's just not many turns, so like you want to have a little bit of a donk leading strategy, but overall, even if you didn't have much of one, it really wouldn't be the end of the world, you know. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind. I mean, like there's certain cards, right, like an 8 or a 4, but like overall. Like maybe I'm speaking too broadly right now. I could be speaking a little too broadly, but
well, yeah. So okay, so I kind of agree and disagree with that. Like I think there's plenty of spots where the lead works well. It's just in terms of what we normally see in game is we see people leading when they either have a spot like this where like the board's kind of wet and obviously like he's just trying to protect his hand here, but really they decide to lead more so because a lead is better for their actual hand rather than it being good for their range. So you see a lot of leading. But you see it being used for the wrong reasons, really. So if you want to like learn how to lead a little bit more correctly, I think it's kind of good to identify the spots. And I definitely think leading is a big part of the game, but it's one of the most incorrectly used strategies that there is. So again, usually when you see donk leads, it's more so because like a card is better for a certain player's hand rather than it's good for their range. So we want to donk lead when certain cards hit our range better than our opponents, not when we're like necessarily like a turn card's really good for us or it's really dry and we want to put in more money.
I actually love that explanation.
Yeah, so I kind of agree and disagree.
I love that explanation you did actually. I like that a lot. Like lead because it makes sense for your range, not for your hand, and that is such a big mental like thing that I think a lot of players do is like they lead because it makes sense for their hand in the spot, but like you gotta think about what their range looks like to the opponent, what the range looks like for the board. Like you're not just leading, you don't need to just lead because like your hand feels like, oh, I don't want a bad card to come out, right? Like that's kind of the thought process of a lot of leads. Like I don't want a bad card to come out, but you got to get out of that mindset and just play the hand as best as possible. And whatever cards come out, they come out. And there's a lot of boards you're still protecting. You don't want bad cards to come out. You're still protecting a lot of boards, but just like play it how it should be played and don't play it in the sense of like I can't lose this hand. What if a bad card comes out? I can't lose this hand, you know, because I do think that's like a very common mindset, like what you're saying.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's keep going through the hands here. So,
sure. All right, got him.
Yeah, calling off here. So yeah, I'm not very surprised. Again, for one, he's probably a little bit stronger than most people are here. Obviously, he has jacks, big cooler. Anyway, the money was going to get in. But I'm not surprised to see our opponent, one, having a strong hand when he isolates, and two, having a very strong hand when they raise there. So again, in theory, it might be better that we just end up fast playing in a spot where a lot of people playing $3 tournaments are just not capable of having bluffs in these spots. So, but it's still good to talk about like theory, for sure, and then like how we want to exploit what we know to be true in theory, and kind of adapt to what our opponents are doing here. So that's why it's good to know theory, but not necessarily have that be the end all be all. We also need to take assumptions into how we think our opponents are playing as well. Like we were talking about basically with our pre-flop ranges a little bit earlier in the hand. So. And all these guys that you hear out there saying that like GTO doesn't matter, that's all bullshit. That's just a reason for them to be like lazy. Like the people who are exploiting people properly, they have a solid fundamental like understanding of how GTO play is, and you're going to be able to exploit your opponents better if you know what like a solid baseline strategy is going to be, and then you can kind of deviate from that depending on the reads you have on your opponent.
Yeah, like I would consider myself like I play a fairly exploitative style, but I would. Like to the GTO fundamental base for sure, like very strong studies in GTO solvers and all the pre-flop charts. You know, you have to kind of know all that.
Can we go
stuff.
back here real quick, Steve?
Yeah,
Sorry to cut you off there. Just go back to when this guy jammed with the threes. Yep, just play it.
I just keep playing. Okay.
Okay, so do you see how quickly that Agora jammed here? So obviously, like, we're going to be strong in this spot once we overcalled here anyway, but when we snap jam, like we just know that like if I'm the original opener here and I see a 3-bet jam and some other guy snap jam, I just know like, you know, you're going to be strong enough in that spot. But when you snap jam, I'm like, okay, he has jacks plus ace king here every single time. So if I even have a hand like ace queen or pocket tens that I think is really close and I see somebody snap jam like that, I'm like, okay, he has a hand every single time. This is already a really tight spot. And I just see a guy snap jam. So what we want to do here is just take our time, because like if we have a close spot, like say in Agora's spot, he has a hand like ace queen or pocket nines here. Like these are closer spots that are going to require a little bit more thought because they're really close. You know what I mean? So when we have hands like this that are really easy, we kind of want to take that same amount of time when we're making a decision, just so we don't make it so obvious to maybe an opponent who is capable of picking out something like this. Obviously, that might not happen at $3 tournament, but if we happen to play in some bigger ones with some better players in there, we want to be taking our time like we have a close decision every time. Like if we had a hand like ace queen, if we have a hand like pocket nines, we're not going to snap make a decision because that's a close spot. So we kind of want to be taking the same amount of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not like something that's like a huge thing, but it definitely makes differences. Like think about it, like, you know, there's an open, there's a shove, guy snap jumps from behind. If you were playing a live tournament, let's say, for just as an example, like you would know that guy is as strong as humanly possible. If he does that like instantly, like you just know it. It's so obvious. Like he has to have like, he's not even thinking about the situation. You know he has a big hand. So you think about it that way. Like the guy is not thinking about what he's doing. He's just snap all in. So he's gonna have a very strong hand, right? But if you're thinking about it there, then maybe okay, like, yeah, maybe he has pocket nines, pocket eights right now. Oh, someone sound. Background guys, mute yourself. Is that Kurt?
No, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, that was weird. Maybe somebody's had background sound. I don't know what just happened. Anyway, maybe this is on my end. But yeah, so if you're like, let's say like you have like a pocket eights right now, pocket nines, like you're not just gonna like snap go with it, right? Like you're gonna sit there and think. So if that first guy has like tens or something and you snap go with it, maybe occasionally you'll get him, he's gonna fold now because he's like, oh my god, you snap went with it. But if you're gonna take a little time there, you might like, you know, get him to get in there. They're very small things, but it's like it makes logical sense. You just kind of want to like take like if you'll notice something about professionals do a lot when they play, they take a very consistent amount of time in a lot of their hands when they're making decisions. It's not just like a snap decision here, snap decision there. Like usually they're taking some time to make their decision, think through it, and like it's just kind of good to be consistent. I feel like in that regard, you know what I mean, Kurt?
Yep. All right. So let's keep it going. Pocket threes, way too wide of a jam in this spot. I think they should just be folding. Obviously, the king 10 is a punt. Not much needs to be said about that. So again, and like, you know, luckily enough, in a $3 tournament, nobody's going to be able to pick up on these things. But just in terms of like, if we ever play against somewhat capable players, just something to take into consideration, because more savvy players are going to be aware of that. So.
And no one ever like snap jams bluffs. It seems like you don't. I haven't seen that like in
very rare. Yeah, very rare for sure. DMC.
Yeah, it's like
you see it from very weak players who have decided they're going to bluff the river beforehand and aren't thinking about which spots they should bluff and which ones they shouldn't. It's like 98% there, but I have seen it extremely rare.
Post flop's a little different for sure. Post flop's definitely a little different, I would say. But pre flop, I think it's like super polarizing when you do like the really quick timing. Post flop, you could like almost trick people sometimes by messing with the timing like a little bit. But like I wouldn't overly think into that or anything. But I definitely know what you're saying. But I think pre flop, it's like so polarizing. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you, Found and Flood, as well. PKO, that might be a thing, but people are like too wide there in general.
Okay, so this is interesting.
So we got an open and a call here.
I think it was just limp and then a call from behind. Yeah.
Oh, he limped. Okay.
Yeah, limp and then limp from behind. So let's start.
Right here, I would normally isolate here.
What was that? Go ahead.
So sorry. Yeah, I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on here, but in general, when you're playing against limpers like this, in general, they are going to be weaker players. So what you want to be doing is isolating, so you can play a pot heads up versus them. Now, for example, I might even be a little more likely to limp a hand like King 10 suited. I think it's like a better hand, obviously, in terms of like hand strength, but also it plays a little better multi-way with the suited variety, and with the offsuit varieties, it's not going to play as well. A little bit more important to kind of isolate the weaker players, which we want to be doing in general. We always want to be able to isolate the weaker players, especially when we have position here. So I would be like making it between 3 and 3.5x here every single time to assure that I'm playing a hand heads up in position against what I perceive to be a weaker player. Also, like whenever we play heads up pots, it's always going to be easier to win those pots. Even if you're playing against weaker players, the more players that are in the pot, the harder it's going to be to take the hand down. So definitely look into isolating like more passive players in these spots when you have position.
Dude, that's the move. Said 100% ISO that screen name. Coochie Coot. Coochie Coot.
Good call.
Good in there for sure.
All right. Yep, let's go.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I'm by like 3.5xing here, so agreement with what you're saying. Gonna play a lot better that way.
And versus a bet and a raise, I think we have a pretty easy fold here.
Yep. Sure.
Let's make sure that's what happens first.
Yeah, let's double check.
Okay.
King of Spades just tempted him, you know? All right.
Yeah. Again, same reasons. For one, I think this hand's probably a little too weak to be limping. This hand's not going to play very well multi-way. We also have 4 other players ahead of us to act. Like, it might be a little bit better if we limp here from the button because at least we're closing out the action with position. But there's still 2 other people that can limp behind here in the cutoff in the button. So if I'm going to VPip this hand, I'm going to be opening here. So, like, definitely 0% limp with this hand. I don't think I need to add on a whole lot to what I said before. I think the earlier the position we're in, the more necessary it is for us to ISO because there's less. It's more likely that we're not going to have position because we have other people that have position on us that can still act here, right?
Little question from last hand that Found and Flood was asking. I'll just go back to this one real quick after. But he was saying in this position, do you 2s through 6s pre-flop, Kurt? Are you isolating usually, or are you limping behind with those hands?
So those hands probably make a little more sense to be limping. For one, you don't really like block any strong hands, and when you get called, these hands don't play very well at like 20 to 30 big blinds. Those hands really play better at like 100 big blinds, and they make more sense to like flop sets and win big pots. So if I'm gonna play those hands, those are probably okay to limp behind. But a hand like King 10 off, for one, it has a little bit more playability. And for 2, like you just want to isolate like the weaker players in general. So I'd probably be a little bit more likely to limp behind, like let's say a hand like ace 4 suited, pocket 3s, pocket 4s, stuff like that. That you know, or either it like plays well enough multi-way and it's good enough to limp, or it just doesn't play well multi-way. Like a hand like King 10 off, for example, I don't think plays well multi-way. I don't think a hand like pocket 3s plays well multi-way. So playability definitely comes into the factor. I'm not saying we have like 0 limps here, but in general, we want to be isolating as much as we can versus weaker players to ensure that we get to play a heads up pot in position.
Yeah, like all those other hands you mentioned play very well in position, like you're saying, and you could potentially hit big hands with them. And also, like, let's say you're isolating 2s through 5s and you get check jammed on. Well, it's kind of annoying. The whole purpose of the hand is kind of for you to see the flop. You know, now you're not seeing it, and it's like, you know, so yeah, there's a few hands you're like most of your range you're going to be raising, but there are going to be a few hands that you're limping. Good question, Found and Flood. That's a good question.
Back to the A7.
So yeah, I think this is a little bit. I think I would just be folding here. I think it's just a little bit too weak to even be isolating. But in general, yeah, you're not going to want to like. I would just say like don't overdo it.
I would definitely ISO ace 8 here, but A7 is close. And for what it's worth, like the weaker the field, the more like aggressive we can be with our VPips, because people are just going to be making more mistakes. But there still has to be a limit too. Yeah. So I probably wouldn't go any bigger than this. I'm usually going around like 3rd pot in this spot, I think. In general, I don't think we get like a ton of big sizes multi-way, mainly because we don't want to be putting in a ton of money when there's so many different ranges in there. Also, the specific hand, if it's a head, like it doesn't need a ton of protection in the spot, so I don't think we need to really go. I think like half pot's fine here, but I would not go any bigger than this. It's kind of hard to nail these spots when there's 4 or 5 players in there, because these spots don't happen very much. There's not really solvers where we can study these kind of things, so it's more of like a freestyle when we get in these like multi-way spots. But again, it's always going to be more difficult, even if they're weaker players. If we're playing against 3 or 4 people in a pot, it's always going to be more difficult to win a pot because you're going against 3 ranges instead of 1. So definitely when you guys encounter people who are limping a lot, you're going to be a little bit more incentivized to isolate.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the move of saying that he isolates a lot of times in a table like this. And like I'm not like completely against it, but like you don't want to like get in the habit of just always isolating ace 7 off and the hijack to a limp. Like yeah, maybe occasionally if the table is that weak, but like I'm unlikely to do it. But I get it. Maybe like later in the tournament it could become a little better if guys are just limping all over the place and you feel like there's an edge to be taken. But overall, I wouldn't get like too much in the habit of that. And like Kurt said,
Well,
ace
yeah,
off.
I mean, like anything, it depends on your position at the table as well. Like isolating from the low jack and isolating from the button are like two completely different
I meant
things.
the hijack. I meant the hijack. I guess I should have emphasized that.
Right.
But I meant the hijack.
Right. Again, I think we already touched on this issue. No need to go back to that. But yeah, we just get another snap call here.
Slow down the timing.
I actually like this jam by the queen 10 here. I think it's pretty good.
He's from the cutoff, like 20 bigs or so.
A lot of suited broadways are going to be jamming in the spot, and I think that's actually a spot that a lot of people miss. And I think it's actually even more important to be jamming like pretty wide in those spots because people do not like raise call as wide as they should be either, which I guess in theory is fine if most opponents aren't like finding the proper amount of jams there. So yeah, just in general, I think his jam is good. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Queen 10's kind of close. It probably just misses it if I had to guess. I'll check what the charts say real quick. Like I think Queen Jack probably has a pure VPIP here, but Queen 10 probably gets a little bit of fold. Again, this would go back to me like if I think my opponent is one opening a lot and two if they're like a weaker opponent, I might VPIP a little wide here. Yeah, it says basically from our charts, Queen 10 is almost always a fold here. Queen Jack's almost always a VPIP. So yeah, just right on the threshold here.
And Queen 10
surprised to see King 10's folding as much as it is, but
and Queen 10 suited a call. Queen 9 suited, right?
Queen 10 suited is jamming here.
Oh, jamming here. Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the suited broadways are going to be jamming in these spots. And then with like King Jack off, Queen Jack off, these hands want to be playing a little bit more flat.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
Yeah. Keep going. Yeah, I don't really show my cards a whole lot, Lex, unless there's like a very specific reason to, which I don't really see there ever being a reason to show your cards unless I'd only really want to show it to somebody if they like have been overly just like been aggressive in the chat for whatever reason, and I might be a little out of character and show them a bluff if I get the opportunity. But yeah, for the most part, I'm not really showing cards. Now, if you're in like a live game or something like that, then maybe you can show it just to for the fun factor or just to kind of mix it up. But in general, there's really not a ton of reasons to be showing your hands.
I used to have this annoying habit of just like showing too much live. Like I would bluff the shit out of someone. I'd be so hyped up about it. I would just like slam it on the table, But it's like doesn't help your situation. Like you're just pretty much giving up like this amazing play you just did where everyone probably thinks you have it, and now you're showing you can bluff in those spots. You're giving free info, right? Like you're just giving them that info.
Right.
Like,
yeah, I agree, Kenny. Live cash definitely a different, and it's definitely more of a friendly environment, and depending on the games you're playing in, like sometimes it's just going to be like random people you'll never see again, so it's not as important. So, but I mean, it's also it can, if you want to, it's fine. Like just my personal opinion, I don't want any reason to give away any information that I don't have to.
yeah, I'm gonna
Do we have the snap call one big blind here?
I think so. So yeah, another one of these moments where you're just not going to want to be calling. Like when you're coming into these pots, you don't want to like be just like calling the first one in. Like I know there's some kind of calling strategy that some players use, but like in general, like we're not really teaching that, and we're just coming in with a raise whenever you're coming into this hand. If you're going to be coming into this hand, it's just going to be played as a raise.
Right. It also simplifies things. Like it's still a decent win if we just raise and take the pot down, and then we know if we limp here, we're at least like gonna see a flop unless we get like isolated here. Like I think this hand is just on the threshold of being able to open here. But yeah, I'm never limping here, and I think in general, you guys should mainly be playing a raise first in or fold strategy just for simplification, and to also make sure that you just get the chance to take down the pot pre-flop because that's a big win too. Now versus an ISO here, I'm probably folding here. I also don't know what the hijack's going to be doing because the hijack can also call too. And then I'm playing with an offsuit ace, like in the worst position, basically. Like I have two people in position against me. So yeah, probably just folding versus this ISO here. I mean, I don't really understand this at all. I mean, I guess if anything, like the board's going to be like okay for us because I would assume if we're gonna have a limping range here, we're mostly gonna be limping like 7-6 suiteds, 8-7 suiteds. But again, I really have no idea what our limping strategy is here. And the other reason like this is really like super out of line is because we have two other players ahead of us to act. Like we're not repping a very strong range by just limp calling. Like we never have overpairs here. We're likely never doing this with like pocket fives, pocket threes. I mean, maybe there's a few hands that it would be okay, but in general, like we want to be checking here quite a bit. Like this board isn't necessarily so good for us that we get to develop a lead. It's also kind of hard to figure out what this limping range is going to be because I wouldn't be able to properly assign a limp range here because I don't study like what people are limping here. So yeah, in general, this is just like way too wide, too spewy, I would say.
Yeah, in general, kind of, just in like a very general sense of the philosophy of poker, like you're, you want to, like, you're bluffing sometimes, but you want your bluffs to hopefully be the most profitable, like successful, like best bluff spots you can take. You want to like, it's not just about bluffing like every random spot. It's about kind of finding the good spots and then taking them and trying to avoid risks too. Like it is important to maintain good stacks. I mean, Kurt, I know talks about it a lot. Is when you have good chips, you don't want to just give them all back. Like your edge changes a lot when you go from 85 bigs to let's say 55 bigs now. You're a very different spot at the table now. Now you got a guy 2 over from you who has a bunch of chips too. So there's like, that's not really like the hugest factor in this hand, but in general, I'm kind of trying to say this from like a very general sense. Like you don't want to overdo the bluffs. Like if you want to go for bluffs, you want them to be good moments. There has to be like good reasons you're going for it. Just having like an ace of diamonds in this spot isn't like a reason enough. Like you want to avoid marginal weird situations as much as you can while you also want to make as much money when you have good hands and then find in between there where you're going to be making good bluffs. But in general, you don't want to like create more, like poker's not about creating too many marginal situations for yourself. You're going to see yourself not doing as well if you're constantly getting in these spots that are like marginal and putting yourself in like very like miserable moments are just going to like make your life like almost like misery. Like you're just going to have so many tough moments constantly. Poker's already tough enough, but if you're going for like tons of marginal spots, then it becomes, an even tougher game to battle, I would say, in like a very general sense. You know what I mean, Kurt?
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna push back on one thing. I'm not like necessarily worried about stack preservation. Like if I have a bluff spot and I think it's good, I'm gonna take it.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
it's just that simple, really. So I mean, obviously there are gonna be spots that are more marginal that you can pass up on, and I'm fine with that. So I agree with what you're saying there. But like if the spot is good, it's good, and I'm gonna take it. Like it might be high risk, but poker's a high risk game. Like if the spot is good for it though, I'm gonna take it. So
sure.
like I think both things need to be considered, but also like I guess there needs to be like some more, and we can obviously work with Agora here in the future too, is just like, I think there might be some fundamentals that we may need to pick up on here a little bit. And just in terms of like playing in flow is kind of what we would call it. More often than not, you should be checking to the razor here. Like there's going to be very few spots where we get leads here, especially for like 2x pot in a spot like this. So I would just essentially on this board, I don't think it's good enough where for one, we get to develop leads. And then two, we also have to worry about two different opponents, like waking up with a hand here in the spot. So yeah, in terms of just like playing in flow, I'd be pure checking here. Now, for example, like if we check and hijack checks and like button bet small, like I think this hand would be a decent spot to either like check fold or check raise, depending on how big we see a bet. And that's more so like playing in flow. Basically, again, you want to check to the razor quite a bit because the razor's range is always going to be stronger than like a caller's range pretty much because they're saying that they have marginal hands. The razor is saying that they're opening with stronger hands. So in general, you want to be checking a lot to the razor unless for whatever reason this specific board that comes out is so much better for your range out of position, and that's when you get to kind of develop leads here. So yeah, anyway, we can keep going. We don't need to harp this too much more.
It kind of touches up a little bit on what we've been saying earlier about, there are like some leading ranges, but you don't want to overdo it with the leads. It's a very general point. Like I'm not going into really details about it, but like in general, when there's got one guy's the aggressor, like your range is weaker than his, and you're going to be leading a lot less. So unless certain cards come, let's say on the turn, that change the ranges in the hand and make it so you have the stronger range advantage in the hand a lot of the time. And just in general, though, you don't want to like overdo it with the leads. As a very like general statement, super general statement.
Yeah, I mean, again, even in spots that are like good for it, you're not just like fully donk leading in these spots. Like you definitely want to mix it up. So, but I would say if you haven't like studied donk leading very much, or you don't really have a basic understanding of it, you can kind of just simplify things and just purely check to your opponent and just kind of play from there, because things can get kind of complicated when we end up donk leading. I mean, things get complicated for me, and I'm studying these spots all the time. So just in terms of simplification, if you guys just want to play a pure check strategy out of position, I think that's going to kind of simplify things for you in general.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Even with my strongest hands, I'm probably checking there.
Yeah.
What's up? Even your strongest hand, you're probably checking there?
Yeah, even with my strongest hands, I'm probably checking three ways out of position there.
Yeah,
That's style, though,
just
probably.
checking range. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be in that spot too much because I'm not like limping there. But yeah, in general, like, let's say if the roles were reversed and like we're in the big blind and we called versus an open, like we'd just be checking a lot in that spot, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's keep going.
I feel like in that exact moment, it's probably like close to 100% check in that exact the ace-8 hand. I could be wrong on that. Like out of position, like in that exact moment, it probably plays pretty close to 100% check. I would think. I mean, maybe there's a few hands. I'm sure.
All right, pause it real quick.
Yeah. Pause it on here. So what are you guys doing?
Okay,
let's get opinions first. Kurt, before you talk about it, let's get opinions in the chat. What do you guys think here against the shove here with ace-10?
Let me know when it's my turn.
You could say you'll say your opinion first, Kenny, and then we'll say ours after. Okay, once everyone speaks.
I think that's all.
Fold versus Trump.
You guys can correct my nit dumb,
That's moves of folding.
I missed the action.
This is folding. So we got an EP jam here with just short of 20 big blinds, and we're in the hijack, and we ended up ISO jamming. Yeah, that's a move in Lex, both folding.
I'm definitely folding here. I'm wondering how much the buy-in size of this tournament impacts this decision at all, but from like a 20 big blind shove under the gun, it's like, best case, they're going to have like some kind of lower pocket pair where we're like 45, 55, something like that. I just don't see many situations where we're like significantly ahead. There's probably a better spot for our chips at this point in the tournament. That's just my own take.
Okay. Rhodesian is also folding. That's move says there's another stack that has us covered behind. That's a big factor. I 100% agree with that too. There are definitely 4 other ranges that can wake up. I mean, obviously the small blind we don't have to worry about very much, but the button having us covered, that's certainly relevant information because they can absolutely wake up with a better hand. Fountain Flood also says in this tourney I'm folding ace-jack suited, maybe from under the gun. I'm not perfect at poker, but definitely too much of an edge to give away when they just open rip AK or even flip pairs. Yeah, so I would say in general, like this open jam from EP with almost 20 bigs, this is not a thing. Like no chart is going to tell you to do this. Even at 15 big blinds, you're going to have very few jams from the spot, and that's mainly because you have so many ranges ahead of you that can possibly wake up with hands that you're very disincentivized to be jamming almost any hand for 15 big blinds or more. So if I see a spot where like somebody's jamming where they shouldn't be jamming, like having a jamming range at all, I'm going to be insanely tight in a spot like this. So even if this guy jams 10 bigs and I have ace 10 in the hijack, I might consider folding here. And I think it is opponent dependent as well. Like, I don't know what the stats on this guy is. If he's playing like a 40-30 and he's just like VPipping too many hands, then this ace-10 is going to be a lot more valuable. But if he's playing like, you know, a 14-12 and he's not playing a lot of hands, then this is going to be a snap fold. So definitely depends on the opponent. But in general, if I just see this open jam here, and I know it's not a thing, I'm just going to be like calling with the very top of my range here.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that point you're making about even like a 10 big shove a lot of the time, you know, like it's still close. Like it's still a kind of like, oh, you're not definitely not pumped about calling if you're calling. And that's why also I think, like, you know, to Found and Flood's point, like the ace jack suited in this spot. Ace jack suited is normally a fold to this because this just isn't a thing, like Kurt is saying, this shove. But if you got some kind of note on a guy, let's say he's been jamming over and over. You've been noticing just jamming over and over. You see him show like queen 5 off one time. Like this, you see these kind of people occasionally, like not all the time, but occasionally you just kind of see these kind of people. If you have a note like that, it changes the story a lot. But in general, if you don't have any note, this is just like a very strong shove. Like he's shoving almost 20 bigs under the gun. You got to put him on the highest part of the Broadway range, and in general, just like hit higher pairs or like pocket eights, or I mean, at least like sixes would be like maybe the bottom. You would think, like even with those hands, it's not like Kurt's saying, it's not a thing to do. But when they are doing it, it's very, very likely the strongest part of their range. Unless you have to have a very strong note, and you don't see this often. But unless you just see some kind of guy jamming over and over and over and over, and you get a note on him, this guy's just jamming every hand, or he's just, you know, whatever. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe in a $3 tournament, you might find guys just like ripping like the ace-8 off or the king-jack off. But even if I know they're doing that, I still think this would like be kind of close, and I just know like I'm gonna find better spots in a field like this. And I think this is like close at best, even if they are capable of ripping like Jack 10 suited and King Jack offsuit. So I think I'm just going to find a better spot. Yeah. So I'm not really surprised to see this. Again, the open rip with nines is not a thing, but yeah.
I feel like nines is like the bottom of what I expect to see him have there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of hard to put somebody on a range where they're making a play that doesn't exist. So because you can't put them on a range because it doesn't exist, basically. So you kind of have to freestyle in that spot and kind of get an idea of what he's been doing at the table. So like Steve was saying, if you have a specific read, if this guy's being like a little out of line, then yeah, maybe you can make a call that might be thin in other terms. But if I just have like blind information and I see some guy like ripping there, I'm just snap folding.
Same. I appreciate it. I do feel like the smaller buy-in you're in, the more you see people ripping more big blinds.
Right. But yeah, no, I agree with you. But you just need like a very like you definitely see a certain guy who just rip anything, like I'm saying, but you need such a specific note to do that. Like maybe that guy has like sixes. There's definitely a possibility he has like a sixes, eights, sevens, nines, whatever, like those type of hands. But when he's shoving the aces in his range are probably like ace queen, ace jack, ace king. Like he's probably not just shoving like ace 6 suited. Like of course some guys, you never know. I've seen it before. I'm sure you all have too. But you can't. You know, it's a random guy in this tournament shoving under the gun for almost 20 big blinds. So you have to just really assume he's going to have a very strong range.
Yeah, you can't assign a range to a range that doesn't exist. So it's kind of hard to really be like pinpoint accurate, and you just need to use whatever information you have at the table.
What did Under the Gun show down?
Yeah, nines.
Nines.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I used to make that play all the time. Like nines through jacks, and then like ace, king, ace, queen. You do them kind of for two different reasons. Like you basically want to get folds with the nines through jacks, and then you want to see all 5 cards with the others. But it definitely is a play I had to get rid of.
I'm gonna say
Kurt,
let me say something real quick, and then I'll let you finish. I was just gonna make a comment that I feel like maybe like 5 years ago I was ripping sevens under the gun for like 17 bigs, and then you study the solvers and you study the charts more, and you realize that's fucking terrible, or not terrible. Sorry, I don't want to be so rude. It's just not a good play. It's like just not that great of a play. You realize you start getting called by all these higher hands, and you're like, oh, is this a good play? And then you start realizing, no, sevens is not even a shove. I don't even think 15 bigs are under the gun. I mean, maybe there are like certain moments, but like overall, like it's not even a shove at that stack depth, and it's kind of create less variance in your game is what I would say. Because I definitely think I see what you're saying. Like years ago, I feel like before like charts were a huge thing, yeah, people be jamming under the gun like 18 bigs a lot of the time, and that's I feel like kind of been like almost like not erase out of the game, but people do it a lot less nowadays. You know what I mean? Let you finish, Kurt.
So I'll say in general, in terms of where that guy jammed the ace 10. Now, if I'm at a table and I see people calling off like king queen suited and like ace 4 suited and stuff like that, I might exploitively like open jam like really strong hands like ace king, ace queen, pocket nines if I know they're calling off super wide. Now in that term, like I know like GTO is going to tell me like I shouldn't be jamming, but if the table is just like insanely calling like really wide, then yeah, throw it into your game. Like it's absolutely fine. So again, it would be easier for me to make these calls if I know, for one, how the table's playing, and for two, how these like $3 games are playing for the most part. So again, we don't necessarily just have to blindly stick to what our pre-flop charts are telling us and what our post-flop solvers are telling us. If we know our opponents are like calling really wide, then we can exploitively like open jam a 20 big stack if we know somebody's going to call off with like an ace 9 suited or pocket fours or something like that with our stronger hands.
Right. For sure. All right, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Good thing to talk about though, because I do, you know, like a lot of these things that like maybe we haven't done in a while. Like it's good seeing like, you know, like people have like random like habits and things they've learned, and maybe they don't even know where they learned it from necessarily. And it's good to just like see them and help you guys correct them, because sometimes just like these kind of things go a very long way when you're playing. Like every one of these like things that we're talking about in these hands, they go a very long way. You correct one of them, your EV is gonna go up automatically, you know. So anyway, let's go from this spot. So this is kind of an interesting moment actually. I think I like this.
No, we can keep it here.
Okay.
So we had a limp from hijack, small blind limped as well. We have an ISO here. I like the ISO. I think in general, like, you know, we want to be, you know, ISOing here with good hands. This hand has a lot of playability. Flops pretty well quite often. This hijack range, again, I have no idea what it's going to be. I don't know what they're limping with. Probably something they shouldn't be, something too wide. So I'm definitely going to ISO here in the spot. Also, if we can end up playing the spot heads up versus this player, even though we're out of position, it's still going to be easier to take the pot down if we're playing against one range instead of just two, because we have the small blind limp as well. So I like the ISO here.
Yeah, okay. I kind of want to ask everybody, but let's ask everybody. Are you guys? I mean, Kurt kind of gave a response already. I was going to ask a follow-up question, but what do you guys think here?
I think that it's kind of irrelevant, honestly. Okay. Like I think the post flop's going to be a little bit better here. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on isolating.
My question
here.
Is, are you jamming here ever on the 21 big hijack limp with the 12 big small blind limp behind? Are you ever jamming this exact hand? Or are you always isolating?
Well, I guess we can let chat answer that.
Yeah. Okay, let's just do that. Are you guys just isolating here?
Bountiful prefers jam because he's out of position. Yep, that's a good point.
It's an excellent point.
Mm-hmm. I think whenever we can just take a pot down out of position, even if we have a good hand, like it's still a pretty big win for us because even if we're playing against weaker players, playing out of position is always going to suck no matter what. So yeah, I would be far more likely to jam here in the big blind than from the button, for example.
Right, for sure. All right, so we got some ISO, looks so strong here, small big blind, 11 big small blind. I found in floods that I prefer to jam because we're out of position. Small blind almost never has a hand, so that's dead money. JD says, I think it's a good
yeah, good point as well.
I think it's good for an open to ISO to heads up in position.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, yeah, let people give an answer, and I'll actually, Kenny, maybe you can go first, and we'll give our perspective after that.
I'm probably not shoving in real time, although I do like the reasons for doing it here. I do like the sizing when you're not shoving. I do like the 4 big blind sizing. So yeah, I don't hate this ISO at all. Actually, I like it a lot. I mean, I probably shove more from the small blind here than the big blind, frankly. I don't know why that is, but just generally my range is much more aggressive from the small blind here. But yeah, I think this
if you're in the small blind, you've got the big blind to act as well. So if you're just limping behind in the small blind, then you're giving the big blind a free opportunity to check, and then you know you're going to see the pot multi-way. Where if you isolate a little bit more from the small blind, you can at least try to get the pot heads up. So I think that would make a lot more sense if you're isolating more from the small blind than the big blind.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I'll say that.
Sorry,
I
found and
think I
fled.
think I play a little bit of. What was that, Kurt? Am I waiting?
I said sorry, found and fled. I blurted out his point before he could get to it.
No, I was gonna say that I would be probably playing a mixed strategy between raising and shoving here. I probably lean a little bit towards raise. I feel like I used to shove this spot a lot more, but I also do think it's a very profitable shove spot too. It seems like you're going to get it through a lot of the time. I feel like Faiso has a pretty wide range here when he's limping the hijack. I don't think he's just going to be on the strongest part of his range most of the time. Of course, he could still have some strong hands in his range. King 10 suited seems like a pretty nice hand to start doing it with. I think it's going to avoid playing a hand out of position against Faiso too. Because you're not like, yeah, it's fine, but you're not like pumped about it. And small blind, like Fountain Flood made a good point about, is just not going to usually have a hand he's going with almost ever here. So you're pretty much going to like eliminate him out of this hand, 95% of the time or something like that. So I think for that reason, you kind of go both ways, but I do think I might like shoving a little bit more, but I'd like to hear what you say. And I'm actually curious what Solver's wonder what to say in this spot. What are you thinking?
I mean, Solver's not going to tell you anything because there's no hijack limps here. So you just have to freestyle. So in general, I would say with no information, I like isolating a little bit more because I have no idea how much the hijack is V-pipping here. Like, is he limping, or is he V-pipping 25% of hands, or is he V-pipping 50 to 60% of hands? Now, if I have that information, if I know he's like limping between 40 and 60% of hands, I'm just ripping here because he's way too wide and this hand is clearly good enough to be jamming. Right. Now, without any information, and if I don't know how wide he's V-pipping here, then I just know that this hand is good enough, but I also don't know if this guy's necessarily playing like such a wide range that this hand is printing as a jam. So again, I think both plays work, but I would definitely choose one over the other with different information. So
yeah, and I was gonna that's the move you said. He limps 66% here. I would say if you see a guy who's like, let's say, is running like 40 over 5 numbers, which means he's V-pipping 40% of the time, and he's barely racing. Okay, well maybe then you could start doing it a little bit more, right? Like there's certain moments against certain opponents, if they're V-pipping 40% of the time and they're calling like every time, it becomes a little bit better. But if you have no info at all on the guy, then it is a lot more up in the air.
Mm-hmm. All right, yep, let's keep it going. Yeah, I actually don't, even if he is V-pipping a lot DMC, I don't hate the race here too, because this hand is going to play very well, and he likely has the best hand. So, yeah, I think you can do very little wrong other than checking here.
So this is kind of interesting. What sizing are you guys taking on this flop now that you are in this hand?
I was going to ask.
I think another. So for one, we want to say, are we actually betting on this flop?
Yeah,
and then if we are betting, how big do we bet?
Good point, Kurt. So are you betting on this flop, and what are you betting if you're betting on this flop?
Mm-hmm.
Do 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 do.
I'm gonna get Steve a soundboard.
Yeah, I need it. I would love it, dude.
I know you would.
I'll probably use it way too much, Just mash the keys. Okay, we got that's the move says he limps 66% here. I just rip. Is it even a donk lead when it's limped pre? No, wait. What DMC? What are you asking? Are you asking if this is a donk lead here? This is not, because he's the razor pre-flop. If that's what you're asking here, this is bad for our range, so I'd probably check. Our hand has a lot of equity, even 3 ways. Bad for our range, so I'd probably check. Our hand has a lot of equity, even 3 ways. Having said that, it shouldn't be great for limper. Small blind should hit this the most, considering they didn't shove pre. Yeah, DMC, a donk lead's when you're not the aggressor is a good way to think about it. Like if you were the pre-flop aggressor, then it's not a donk lead anymore. Even if you're out of position, yeah. Oh, you forgot that he raised. Okay. All right, let's see what last few have to say. Give our opinion here. Rhodesian's checking. Small bet 30%. Hugh Reese says, welcome Hugh Reese also. I'm not a fan of the open sizing to accomplish the same with smaller.
I don't agree with that. I think the smaller that he isolates, the easier it's going to be for him to call.
Yeah.
So I think when you're specifically out of position, you want to be using bigger isolating sizes, because if you can just get folds, like that's a big win in and itself. And then you also charge them more money to be limping what's likely a weaker range. And then also, like, you make it harder for the small blind to complete as well. So in position, I would say, in theory, you can make smaller isolating raises. And then out of position, you're a little bit more incentivized to make the price a little bit worse. Because for one, you're going to be tighter because you're out of position, so you're not going to be isolating as wide. So in general, you're going to size up for that reason. And then for two, you want to give them a worse price so you don't encourage them to be able to easily limp call versus a small isolating raise.
Let's say if you go 3x here, there's a much higher chance he's going to check call you or limp call you here than if you're going like 4x, for instance, or a decently stronger chance.
Correct.
Like the smallest I would ever consider making it there is like 3.5, but I think 4 better, frankly.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I think that's very on point. All right, so I think it's a GMC said I think it's a great jam spot. Kenny, what are you thinking here? Desimov says he would shove.
I think my initial reaction here would be to bet like 5 or 6 big blinds, but the more I think about this, right, where my reasons for checking are mostly their stack sizes, and I do think we have a lot of equity and a lot of good turns here. Also, if we check the flop, there's a good chance that this guy will try to steal the pot behind us. And at which point, with 2 overs and a flush draw, I'm just calling off against, keeping it bluffs in his range as well. I don't really think this particular flop texture hits the small blind as hard as like 7s or 8s high flops would. But I could be way off there.
I'll just say my piece, Kurt, and then you can go ahead. I would be jamming, I think, on this flop. I think there's already just a lot of money in this pot. You have 2 overs and a flush draw here. The small blind does hit this range somewhat for sure, but you want to put at least his like 4x's to the test, and he's gonna have some 7/8s and hands like that where you don't really want to like tempt him to. I don't know. I mean, obviously those hands you're beating those hands, so I guess 7/8 isn't really a huge deal. I just think there's too much money in this pot, and I think it's just the best play in this hand. I'm not 100% sure that's like the solver play, but it's just kind of what's coming to my instinct.
I'm never folding. Like, I'm going to make that clear.
If you're
like,
betting, you're calling off for sure. So it's like a bet
for
call.
sure. And I also think we get it in with weaker hands by maybe giving the in position guy an opportunity to rip here. But I don't know how often he does that on this board.
I feel like betting's a fine option too. I mean, you're betting to go with it. Ripping's just kind of the first thing that's coming to my instinct, but I think I'm having a little bit hard time.
That's the move made an interesting point. What are you dealing with overpairs here? You're just ripping, right?
That's a good question, actually. I feel like I'd be more apt to bet overpairs, but I think it's okay to balance that sometimes by ripping here too. But I think an overpair might be fine to put in a small bet, but it is a board we want to protect a little bit on. If we had, like, let's say this, kings with a spade, I'd like betting small a lot more than kings with no spade, right? Like,
what if you have like 8s here with no spade?
I think 8s I'm probably just jamming. I kind of have a feeling Kurt's not jamming with 8s, but Kurt, let's hear what you got to say. Get in there.
All right. So first off, this board doesn't hit our isolating range very well. This is like pretty good for. Again, it's kind of hard to really pinpoint what people are limping because we don't really have that information, and these aren't really things that we're seeing from at least competent players here very much, who at least have like well-constructed ranges. I think people are just kind of freestyling here, so it's kind of hard to put them on anything. But for the majority of our range, we're going to be isolating like strong pairs and then like a lot of broadways. So a 6-4-3 is going to whiff the majority of our isolating range that isn't essentially pocket pairs. And then like hands like this that flop flush draws. So in general, this board's pretty bad for us. So I don't even hate a check here, but the bottom line is we're gonna be doing a fair amount of checking because we're gonna have like so many like let's say a7 of clubs. We're gonna have some king jack of diamonds here that can't just be checking here. Also, if I have a hand like aces and kings, I wouldn't mind trapping here specifically with the spades because they need a little less protection, and mainly because this board is not very good for us. So I think we do a lot of checking here, but when we do decide to bet, which should not be very often, we probably want to be using a bigger size, because like I always say, when we're having a more polarized betting frequency, meaning that we're betting like a very small amount of our hands, we want to be using a bigger size, because whenever we polarize, we have a more polarized range. We want to be using bigger sizes here. So in general, I would not be betting this board a whole lot, but when I decide to bet, I'm going to be betting for a very big size. So I even think like we're essentially 17 and a half effective. That's basically a little more than pot. So I think it's probably fine if we're going to have bets here to be ripping. I also think it's probably fine to bet small with some hands. I think mainly the majority of our hands are going to need a lot of protection here because the board is so wet. But for example, if I have a hand like aces with a spade and I want to bet, I don't mind just block betting here, because we don't necessarily need a ton of protection in the spot. Same goes with like if we ever isolated a hand like pocket sixes. I don't know if we're doing that, but maybe if we ever isolate a hand like ace five of spades, like, you know, that's a hand that we don't mind getting a lot of action with, because, you know, any of these like quote unquote bad turn cards like a deuce or a seven, which actually shouldn't be very good for our range, actually does improve us. So I would say in general, we want to be using a very big size here. So I like jamming or like betting big. Obviously we're stacking off when we make it this size, with a little bit of like very small betting. But in general, I think it's important to note that this board is not very good for our isolating range overall. So we're going to be doing a lot of checking here. That being said, we get a few bets, and when we do bet, we want to go for the bigger size here.
All right, sounds good. I think I'm not checking enough in these spots. Definitely, like don't have much of a checking range in this moment, but I definitely agree a lot with what you're saying, and I'm sure it's very Odin.
Yeah, like if I have a hand like ace five of spades, ace deuce of spades, ace seven of spades, I think these hands are definitely like strong enough where we can slow play, and we don't mind if somebody ends up betting here. So like I think it's definitely fine to work in some checks with hands like that. Also, like I said, like aces and kings with a spade, I think we can slow play as well, because they don't need a ton of protection either. We allow our opponents to bluff or potentially value bet with worse. So yeah, clearly a punt from the small line as well.
Boys.
Oh,
What's up?
You gotta get out of here, Kenny.
That's why I don't limp the small blind, because then I don't want to, you know, call to a raise and then put my last big blind, 8 big blinds in with bottom pair. I just keep myself out of these situations. It's like I'm not good enough to play all these in between spots like I was when I'm 20. So I just try to play a strategy that puts me in a spot to succeed. Like this is $3 buy-in classic right there.
I maybe Kurt can go off that. I think limping the small blind is still. There's certain moments when it's not good. Obviously, let's say you have like a jack 3 off or something on that position. Okay, it's not a very good limp, but I would say 3-2 suited probably is strong enough to limp there with it. And maybe Kurt can go ahead. I think he'll make some good.
Yeah, I think you can probably complete like any 2 suiteds there for the most part, especially if you perceive your opponents to be weaker. But versus an ISO, I think we definitely need to be folding there. You know, we're calling like 20% of our stack. You know, we have 2 players in position against us. We are probably representing the weakest range, and we have like one of the weakest hands. So I think the complete is fine in the small blind, but versus an ISO, we probably just need to fold.
Yeah, agree. I agree with that. All right, we'll probably go about 10 more minutes here, guys, and we're gonna hop on Twitter Space here in a little bit. For a little poker Twitter Space before me and Kurt hit the table. So hopefully see all y'all there. All right, so we'll stop it here. What are you guys doing with the ace queen here to the open of 24 bigs, let's say, in the hijack?
I'm making this like 6.5 probably.
6.5 bigs, Kenny says, so about a 3.3x 3-bet or so.
I would make it smaller, like 5.2.
Okay, so Narco Cop's going about 2.6x, we'll call it. 2.7x, 2.6x.
Like 5.5 bigs.
Yeah, he said 5.2.
Mm-hmm.
So we got. I saw Lexi posted in the wrong chat, just so you know, but I see you said 8 big blinds. Odin's brother says 6 big blinds. AK Found and Flood.
So it seems like the whole room's a consensus. This is 100% 3-bet, right?
Looks like it, yeah. Everyone seems to be 3-betting. So everyone's between about 5.2 to 8, I would say, is I think the whole range we got here. Found and Flood says at the stacked up, I usually go 6 bigs in position, 8 bigs out of position. So I think that's pretty fair. I'll say what I'm thinking. I'm probably going similar to what Kenny's going / you guys have been saying, probably about 6 to 6.5. Here, you want to make it look like it's still possible that you can get a fold, or so that he can get a fold. If you let's say he has like an ace-6 suited, you want to make him believe like if you go 8 big blinds, he knows you're not folding. So you don't really want to go that sizing because he's on 24 big blinds. So you want to make it seem like there is a chance that if he 4-bet shoves you, let's say, you could he could have a worse hand, and also you're playing in position right now, so you don't necessarily need to be sizing up huge. So kind of those are the biggest two factors for me, where you're 3-betting against a shorter stack with a pretty strong hand that you're hoping maybe he'll stack off with some worse hand, and you're in position anyway, so you don't really need to size up too much. I wouldn't necessarily go super small. I would probably go like 3 to 3.3x. I'm sure 3.5 is okay too, but I wouldn't go any bigger than that.
I have a question, Steve.
Yeah.
So I know he's opening with like 24 bigs.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're going like you're saying 6 or 6.5 bigs, aren't you leaving less room for him to 4-bet shove? That's why I kind of think why I'm thinking 5.2. Like you're giving him more room to shove. Like you're going with your hand against this guy no matter what. So I'm not saying on every flop. I'm saying no matter what pre-flop. So
yeah.
why not give him more rope? And then, I mean, I know he can call and you're giving him more odds to call here, but your hand still plays pretty well in position versus this guy.
I would say that a couple of things about that, and I'll let Kurt make a point too. I would say later in the tournament that becomes better. Once you're like deep in the tournament and the stacks are a lot shallower, then like a size like that will become better. But I think just this is kind of more the standard size most people go, and I think it's also the size you should be going with your bluffs too. So I don't, if you're, let's say, only doing that with your strong hands, then yeah, it becomes a little bit like, all right, then it's very obvious you have a strong hand, but you should be doing that at least sometimes with your bluffs. I also I want him to call. I'm in position. I'm not necessarily want him to call 100% of his range either. And I also I don't know if it looks weak to do that or not. That might even look stronger to some opponents to go 5.2 there, because you're going such a small sizing that some people might even think you're very strong because you're doing that. So I think there's yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, in that regard, then even if I'm balancing with my bluffs, then that's good too, though.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm gonna pick it up right here.
Let Kurt jump in here because I think he could explain this a little better than me.
Sorry, because I think Narco is right there. He's actually mentioning some things that I want to mention here. So I'm just going to ask you guys right now, if we have 24 big blinds too, what are we doing with Ace King? Are we 3-bet calling or are we jamming? We might have some different issues here, but I'm just going to say straight up, if I have 25 bigs in this spot, I'm just open jamming with Ace Queen off. So Narco brings up a really big, good point here, I think. And I think it's good for us to have 2 different 3-bet sizes here. Now, in general, I know if we're 24 effective, I want to play for stacks here. But I know also if I have 24 bigs, I'm not 3-bet inducing, I'm just jamming here. That's what the charts tell us. That's what we want to end up doing. With the offsuit varieties, we're always going to be more likely to be just open jamming, or not open jamming, but 3-bet jamming, as opposed to 3-betting not all in and potentially letting our opponent call, because when we have the suited varieties and we do get called, those hands are going to play a little bit better post flop. So anyway, if I'm in this spot and I have a hand I know I would normally be jamming, but let's say we have 80 bigs here, but the big blind has 50, we can't just rip our stack in here because we're trying to ISO against a guy with 24, because there's still a chance that the big blind can wake up. So in this sense, what I would be doing here is I would have 2 different raise sizes. I would have a bigger raise size that's essentially saying I'm obviously going with a hand, but I'm not going to give you a good price to flat behind. So basically I'm making him either make the decision to 4-bet jam or fold. So what I would do in this spot versus a 2x open here, I would make it 7 bigs here, because at his stack size, he should not have any flats versus a 3-bet that big. But it's also not a big secret that I'm folding here. I want to play for stacks, but I can't just rip it in because we have other big stacks behind us as well that could wake up. So if I make it 7 bigs and then the big blind just rips in 50, I can still get away from it. You know what I mean? So I think it's good to have that size for hands that you just want to play for stacks as a 3-bet jam. I can't necessarily just rip it here because there are other stacks behind. So in this situation with this hand, I would make it 7 bigs here. and give him a worse price. Like, he shouldn't be calling. I know some people do, but they shouldn't be. And then if I have like bluffs, I'm going to be making it smaller, like Narco Cop was saying. So for one, if we 3-bet bluff a little bit smaller, like if we make it like 5.2 here, we get a better price on a bluff here. And also when we have like the very top of our range, like ace king suited, pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket queens, we don't want to be going huge here, because then it puts them in a chance where they have to just either 4-bet jam or call. And then also if we make it small, we don't mind getting calls with those hands there. So like basically with the range I'm going to be going with, like pre-flop, like say for example ace queen, pocket nines, pocket eights, and I want to play for stacks here, I'm going to make it like a very obvious, like I'm not folding here, but it's not going to be the super top of my range, but it's still going to be a hand that's good enough to go with. And then with like my bluffs and the very top of my range, I'm going to use a smaller size, like 5.2 to 5.5 big blinds, so I get a better price on a bluff. And then I also kind of induce them to call or give them some rope to 4-bet jam when I make it like a smaller price here. You know what I mean? Because I think the smaller we go, the more bluffs that we should have in our range. Because if we just go huge here, like we're going to have to call for the price that we're getting. So essentially, if we 3-bet bluff for huge, we're putting ourselves in a spot where we have to call it off with a hand that's not good for doing it here. So I actually think Narco made really good points here, that we should definitely have different sizes for different hands that we want to be doing here.
Yeah. And on that note, what Narco was saying, I'm probably not doing that sizing enough, so I'll incorporate that a little bit more. The bluffs.
Yeah, very good catch there, Narco. I think that's something that a lot of people aren't doing as well. I've just kind of picked it up myself. Actually, watching Ben CB's stream, I've been doing that a little bit more, and I think obviously if he's doing it, I think it works. I think for the reasons I said, I think it's good to be having two different raise sizes in these spots here too. So with this specific hand, I know I'm just going with it pre-flop. So I would just be making it bigger here, and then with my bluffs and the very top of my range, I'd be making it a little bit smaller here.
Kurt, full transparency, that's where I got it from, honestly. So
really? All right.
Yeah,
well, there you go. That makes sense.
There you go.
That completely makes sense then.
All right, let's do one more, and then we're going to bounce out.
Right.
To the Twitter space here. All right, so
honestly, I'm sorry. Honestly, his stream is gold, like for people to like learn. I know it's high stakes, but man, that guy, he talks over every move that he makes. So.
All right, so this was
It does. Sorry, real quick. It does kind of suck because like you can't communicate with them because he's got so many players on there. But he is really good at talking through his hands and explaining his thought process. So that's actually a lot of gold there. If you guys want to check him out as well.
Yeah, like we always talk about, watching good high stakes players play in general is always not going to hurt you. Good, like you watch someone who's great just playing, like whether it's you can see his cards or not, it ain't going to hurt you. So yeah, we've kind of talked about this spot. You want to be coming in with a raise when you're coming into these spots. And then also, yeah, I would say when 17 big blinds comes in, this is why like I would be actually raised folding here. I think Kurt, you'd be agreeing, right? You'd be raised folding usually here to the split off jam if you opened, right? Yeah, so it wouldn't be playing as a call either if you're limping, So I think it's kind of simple to explain. Like you're like even if you're opening here and the guy jams, like ace 2 suited is probably not gonna be running very well against his range. Yeah, he's gonna have the occasional jack 10 suited, queen 10 suited, king 10 suited, jack queen suited, king jack suited, whatever, all those kind of hands. But he's also, every time he has an ace, is gonna have you absolutely dominated. He's gonna have a lot of pocket pairs in his range. It's just a marginal spot that you want to avoid, even if you're whatever, 60, 35% in general in this spot, 40%, whatever it is, you just want to avoid it. It's just, you don't want to just give too many away in pre-flop calls that are unnecessary. It's kind of a simple way to put it, I would say.
I'm definitely.
I also don't think people are like jamming enough in those spots either. So if I think it's close at all, I'm just going to pass on it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
And yeah, that's kind of a spot where ICMizer will be able to help you guys. So like if you assign a raising range and then you give them a 3-bet jamming range, and then you can kind of see if your hand has enough value to end up calling or not.
All right, guys. See you on Twitter.
All right, yeah, we'll be, let's, last one for sure. This one, last one. We're going to head over there. Pre-flop spots are closer than a lot. So kind of the same thing we've been talking about. I'm not even sure this is an open curve from this position, or is it? It might be the bottom of the opening range from the low jack.
I think it's probably fine.
Yeah, I think it'd be fine as an open. For sure, it's not bad if you fold it either. But yeah, kind of.
Especially with this hand, it's my favorite hand down to the suits, so I'm always going to say thumbs up to 10-8 of hearts.
Right. Yeah, 10
I think that was Carlos Mortensen's favorite hand, if I can remember correctly.
What was that?
I think it was Carlos Mortensen's favorite hand. I remember when I first watched the World Series. Yeah, I think it was a 10-8 suited. Ooh. I was digging it too.
So I think when there's a limp, I like this check on the flop 4 ways. Makes sense. You're playing out of position here. A lot of hands are going to beat you. I mean, it's a limp, so it makes it a little bit weirder, but...
Yeah, but even if he opens pre, this board is going to be like one of the worst for like a pre-flop opener's range. Yeah. In general, like on these super wet, low boards, especially when you're multi-way, there's going to be a lot of checking happening. Again, it's kind of hard for me to go off because I don't play a limping strategy here, so I don't know how to assign a range to what we should be doing here. But in general, on these boards, there's going to be a lot of checking.
And Agora, just none of these like pre-picking actions. Just stop doing that. You know what I mean? Just no pre-picking your action before it gets to you. You know what I mean? Like I see you have checked right now. Just don't do that. Like just let it get to you. Make your decision there and take your time with your decision. It's okay to just like take your time. Make sure you're making the right decision. You know, like don't rush into it. And on this board, I would be betting. I would assume Kurt would be also. I think it's strong. You have a straight right now. You want to start getting your value. There's a good chance they're going to check back on you on this turn after they check back the flop. Like maybe someone has a 3x. You're not really worried about 8, 9 too often. I mean, it's possible. Some people could have some 2 pairs. There still could be some flush draws out there. There still could be some 7x's people have, some 6x's, 5x's. So yeah, I would be betting for those reasons. What sizing would you be picking here, Kurt?
Well, for one, I would definitely be checking this sometimes too, because like it's not like we just want to be betting here every single time we have an 8, because this board's going to be like really wet. So not only do we want to be checking sometimes some stronger hands, but we also want to give some rope for our opponents to either bluff or value bet with worse. So I would definitely mix here. I think 10-8 specifically probably wants to be betting like of all your 8x pretty like much the highest frequency, because when you do make a 9, you make the super nuts. So with this 8 specifically, I would probably high frequency bet here, and then like be doing a little bit more mixing with like if we have like 8-6 suited or king 8 suited, stuff like that. Because this board is so wet, like we're going to be doing very little betting. And if we are betting, since we are betting such a very small portion of our range, we're essentially for value, we're betting an 8 or a 3 sometimes. So if we're only betting straights for value, our only like draws are going to be like 9x and clubs basically. So if we're going to bet with such a polarized range, we want to be using a bigger size. So bottom line is we should be checking this board a lot, but when we do bet, we want to use a more polarized bigger size here. So I would be making it at least 4 bigs here, I think.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. That's the move. Sucks. But for what it's worth, I think checking is fine too. I think this board's so wet, I don't mind trapping this hand too.
So this is interesting here. I mean, I guess if you didn't bet, it would be a lot more interesting, but still kind of interesting. You're never turning this into a bluff, are you, Kurt, or are you sometimes? Curious. Probably not very often, but I feel like he has a lot of 9s, but...
Not with half pot 5 ways, like it's just...
4 ways, yeah.
It's just nobody's bluffing in those spots, bottom line. But the thing, like, I also think his bet size really sucks too, because for that size, like, if he has a bluff there at all, like, he's just not getting folds. Like, that size is not getting through 3 people. I don't hate his call because he does block like an 8-9, a 10-9, stuff like that. But just in general, I don't think anybody finds bluffs in the spot, especially when they make it small, because I think the best size should be like a pretty big size here, mainly because like if you have bluffs, are you ever just like half potting it here? Probably not, because like people are just going to call every single time, and you have 3 different ranges to get through. So when I see this size, I'm just like, okay, this is value every single time. So I might just like exploitively fold here, even though like in theory, I think this would be like a decent bluff spot. But if I think like this spot is, for one, being under bluffed, and 2, when I see that size, I'm never thinking it's a bluff either. So it's just like 2 different things come on top of it. So I'm just going to like exploitively fold everything here.
Yeah, something you've mentioned. I mean, like there's certain people who like when they have it, just bet half pot. Like, I mean, there's certain people who just bet half pot all the time, but half pot in general is one of those sizings, especially in a hand like this where it's multi-ways, where it's just like screaming he probably has it. Even if some people should have some bluffs, they really don't enough in these spots when they're betting this kind of sizing.
Yeah, I think bluffs would be pot or over, frankly.
Right.
My value hands might be 2 here, but yeah, I'm gonna hop over on Twitter because I think
cool.
Linus is waiting. So
Yeah. Get in there, dude. Yeah, we'll get in there here in a moment. Does anyone have any questions here before we sign off? Go to this Twitter space. Then we're gonna be streaming after me and Kurt. So, and then the community tournament's coming up. So we got an action-packed day today.
Yeah, shout out to Agora again for providing the hand history here, man. We really appreciate it. Hope you got something out of it for sure.
Yeah, Agora, dude. Thank you so much for letting us review this. Obviously, we're going to keep reviewing this. We got a lot of action to go, but hopefully, you know, it helped you a lot, and we just want to let everybody know, yeah, like, don't be scared to submit these to us. Like, this is only going to, like, trust me, if we're going after, like, reading your specific hand history, like, imagine how much you're going to get out of it, because, you know, this is your in-game flow. Like, it's just only going to help you so much, and, like, no one else is really doing this, reviewing, like, members' hand histories live and, like, doing seminars about it. This is, like, you know, it's just, this is like the most improvement. I wish when I was 10 years ago playing that someone would have done this for me. Like, you know, like if some kind of high stakes pro would be like, oh, I'll review your hand history and look through it and tell you all the errors I think you're making and things you could improve. That's like instant improvement in your game. And I would just highly recommend whoever's feeling ambitious enough, submit your hand histories to us. And like, again, I don't think we were too hard on Agora or anything. And we're just obviously all here to improve, and it's all love and just, we're just trying to help you guys improve and get better and make you guys more profitable poker players when it comes down to it, you know?
Yeah, no, thank you guys. And honestly, like, obviously, it's like I made a whole bunch of mistakes. And I think, one, it's much more helpful having you guys go over hands that I've actually played rather than me just seeing some random plays that I wouldn't even make myself. So it's like, it's definitely helped me. And also, I'm just hoping that it helps other people who might feel discouraged, because it's like, as someone who, it's like, I have a lot of eyes on me in the community, it's good to almost expose myself to this and hopefully make other people feel better about opening up. So I hope that does happen.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up that point, because like just seeing somebody like make a play and then have an analysis on something you're actually doing, like obviously that's going to stick with you a lot more, because you know you're in game, you're making these decisions, and then we're commenting on these because we might be doing commentary on things that you may not be doing in your own game, so they might not apply to yourself as much as they may apply to somebody else. So as important as I think it is to review like some of these final tables we've done, some of my hand histories, I also think it's good that we mix in some review for you guys as well, because that's definitely going to help us improve like certain little details that we need to address with your own games as well. So definitely doing a mixture of both is great. So I'm really glad you pointed that out, Agora.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks guys. I guess I'll see you on Twitter.
Yeah, see you guys on Twitter here in a few. Appreciate all y'all for hanging out. Great answers, by the way. Love to see you guys just improving and, you know, all the feedback, and just fucking love to see you guys improving session by session. So it's fucking great, guys. All right, we'll see you guys on Twitter. Yeah. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, guys. Great session today.
All right, later, guys. Bye. See you in a bit.